So I'm going to speak for a few minutes, and then we'll take a break, and then we're going to do another writing exercise. This time I'm telling you before the break, so you can gather your implements during the break. I'm going to do a little talk, a little mini Dharma talk, and then then we'll have a writing, and then we'll end with Q&R in the afternoon with Q&R. I think we're supposed to do something else, more another book thing, or no? I think not. I think that's it. And then the evening with the amazing Gustavo Santolaya. All right, so I want to talk about the metaphor of the butterfly, the metaphor of metamorphosis, which I know many of you are familiar with and have probably thought about a lot, especially people who love dead people. That is, I meant to say, people who love people who have died. And there's nothing like the metaphor of a butterfly to remind us of our loved ones. How many people have had some kind of mystical moment having to do with butterflies and the death of a loved one? Hands up. It's a lot of us. Yeah, me too. So there's something very archetypal about this metamorphosis pattern in our souls that is imprinted in our souls in some way. Teresa of Avila talked about it 500 years ago in The Interior Castle. She came up with the metaphor of the silkworm, and I'm going to read you her version of that in a moment. But first, a little bit of very basic science of metamorphosis. If there are any biologists in the room, please forgive me. This is not going to be rigorous science. But the 4 phases of a butterfly metamorphosis are laying the eggs, the caterpillar hatches, and eats and eats and eats, and then spins itself a cocoon, the chrysalis, and dissolves inside the chrysalis, and then emerges as a butterfly, right? Everyone familiar with those 4 stages. So what I'm interested in doing right now is seeing how they overlay the spiritual journey. If you would like to translate that another meta level up to our collective movement through these difficult times in which we find ourselves, I'd be interested to hear your reflections on the communal analogy of butterfly metamorphosis, the collective metamorphosis. I haven't quite taken it there yet, but I can tell that it's going to work. The idea in looking at this is that, remember, we talked a lot, I did and Jim did as well, this in the last couple of days, about how awakening, liberation, enlightenment, salvation, any of those kinds of aspirations, that it's unhelpful to think of it as a final or a destination at which you will arrive. And I write about that a lot, and you heard me write about it in that last bit. So the reason I love the butterfly metaphor is that the butterfly actually is continuously unfolding. There are annihilations and resurrections in the butterfly cycle. There is, I love this, an awkwardness in becoming a butterfly. When the butterfly, have you seen video of the butterfly first emerging from a cocoon? Or maybe you've seen it in real life. So the butterfly breaks out of the cocoon and she's like, what the fuck just happened? What are these things on my back? And they're all crumpled up and wet, and she's like trying to raise, I'm saying she just for fun, raise one wing and cling one unfamiliar foot, you don't call it a foot for an insect, do you? Leg, to the branch on which she emerged, and it's not pretty. And she might like try to fly, but only one wing is really dried enough to unfold. Yeah, it's like that for a bit. When I first saw that, I was like, oh, good, me too. Every time I have a transformation, I'm like, whoa, I'm very disoriented, and I don't trust these new things on my back called wings. So that's the first clue, that it's not just like, yay, I had an awakening experience and off I go into the wild blue yonder. It usually is not a smooth liftoff. So we're on a path of transformation. We're becoming whole, and then we're breaking, and we're becoming more whole, even more whole than we were before we broke. And it's a continuous unfolding and a cycle. It's dynamic. It's not a static, thank God, situation. Maybe I'll just read Teresa, and then we'll go through those 4 stages real quick and see how they apply to the spiritual life. But I want you to hear her words from 5 centuries ago. For those of you who are not familiar with this little book, it's called Saint Teresa of Avila, Passionate Mystic. And I did a little series for Sounds True of small contemplative books. This is the one on Teresa of Avila, with a foreword by Carolyn Mace. And I did one on Francis of Assisi with a foreword by Richard Rohr. And one on John of the Cross with a foreword by Jim Finley. And so this is all my favorite bits from Teresa of Avila, most of which I translated myself, but not all, and then my own sort of poetic reflections. So page 31, it's actually from the Interior Castle, which I also translated in its entirety. And this is the beginning of the 5th dwelling, that what Jim called the mansion. That's the more traditional description of the 7 chambers of the interior castle. But the original word in Spanish for those chambers of the interior castle is morada. And a morada is a sacred space, like a chapel, without windows. So it's dark, and it's usually soft and round. Where I live in New Mexico, there are moradas scattered all through the landscape, through the high desert landscape. And they're secretive spaces where the hermanos penitentes, the brotherhood of, there's a brotherhood that developed in the 17th century in the mountains of New Mexico, very isolated villages where priests didn't always come because they were so far from anything. And so the people developed their own spirituality. And one of them is this hermanidad, this brotherhood that is all oriented around the passion of Christ. And they do their practices in these moradas, these small adobe buildings, freestanding, with no windows, that are very womb-like. And I guess these originated in Spain, as so many things that we do in New Mexico did, like the whole acequia irrigation system that we use in New Mexico to this day has its roots in ancient Spain, really developed by the Muslims, by the Moors, and have Arabic names that the farmers in New Mexico still use. I love all those connections. Sorry, that was a tangent. So the siete moradas, these 7 spaces, are really more literally translated as dwellings. So in the 5th dwelling, 4th dwelling, as Jim described this morning, is where we really shift from the head to the heart. In the first 3, we're kind of figuring out the spiritual life. And in the 4th dwelling, so like the 4th chakra in the Hindu system, we drop into the center of our being, into the heart center, and let go of all of our ideas about what the spiritual life is supposed to be. In the 5th dwelling, we become inflamed with love longing. We are filled with desire for God. And that desire is a fire, and it dissolves all the old structures. So, says Teresa, you must have heard about the incredible way that silk comes into being. What a marvelous example of his wonders in creation. Only God could have invented something like this. It all begins with little grains, something like peppercorns. As the weather gets warmer and the mulberry tree starts to leaf out, the seeds are quickened with new life. It had seemed that these nuggets were dead, but now they stir and begin to nourish themselves on the sustenance of the mulberry leaves. Soon they grow to full size. That's when they settle down onto some twigs and begin to spin silk with their tiny mouths. They weave these little silken cocoons and trap themselves inside them. After a while, the plump and homely worm emerges as a graceful white butterfly. The silkworm is like the soul. She comes alive with the heat of the Holy Spirit and begins to accept the help God is offering. She starts to make use of the remedies available in spiritual community, things like ritual, sacred literature, inspiring talks. And so, when the silkworm is fully developed, it begins to build the house in which it will die. So let's get on with it, my friends. Let's do the work quickly and spin the silken cocoon, relinquishing our self-centeredness and personal willfulness and giving up our attachment to worldly things. We have learned exactly what to do. Let's do it. Let it die. Let the silkworm die. This is the natural outcome once it has done what it was created to do. Then we will see God and see ourselves nestled inside their greatness, like the silkworm in her cocoon. So many cultures and religions invite us, try to entice us to die before we die. Why is this such a universal spiritual invitation? That doesn't sound like fun. And yet it is glory, especially when we yield.